the biographer's first obligation is to the truth, not to your subject's friends, not to concerns about how they will react to it, but to truthfully seeing the subject. And that's certainly what I try to do. And you can't do that without really intense curiosity and leaving no stone unturned, as Robert Caro would say, or no page unturned.
Carl Rollyson is a prolific modern Plutarch with a special expertise in writing biographies, mostly about the creative lives of artists. His numerous biographies are expressions of his particular curiosity, and so his curiosity is prolific too. Plato developed a philosophy as an inquiry into how to live a good life through the focal point of dialogues based on the biography of his teacher Socrates. And as with any biography, we can never be sure of everything Plato says about Socrates. Socrates had an unfettered curiosity that delighted and irritated the citizens of Athens. He is believed to have said that the unexamined life is not worth living, and he repeated that the oracle at Delphi instructs the individual to know thyself. To examine how we live and how others live, we ask questions. We might not always get the definitive answers that we want, and the questions may not always be welcome, but the point is to ask the questions. But how do we know what questions to ask? Where should we let our curiosity go? My first question is, I think of biography as a particular expression of curiosity, maybe even a unique genre of curiosity, one that enters literature as a new way of thinking with Plato and the ancient Greek historians. If that is correct, what does biography as a form of literature teach us about the faculty of curiosity and its role?
Really interesting question. In listening to your introduction, I was thinking about how much both Plato and Socrates have influenced me, particularly this notion of dialogue. I think that biography is a form of knowledge in and of itself, which is not generally recognized that way. For me, what is so attractive about biography, in a sense, does go right back to Plato and Socrates, which is the ideas, the lies that we're interested in, and the ideas behind those lies, behind those thinkers, for example, or creators, if they're artists, are not, biography tells us anyway, that they're not detachable from the person. And I think that's what made me latch on to biography and fitted so well with my early background in acting that I was interested in how the personality shapes ideas, even as ideas shape the personality. So I think that's at least one of my fundamental interests, is that dialogue with the subject, which is what Plato was showing with Socrates all the time. And I think it's what biographers, even if they don't put it in dialogue form on the page, are doing much the same thing.
So, listening to you, and one of the points I pick up from you is that um, the um, the point about not being detachable from the person. The life is not detachable from the person. Um, is that an aspect of the curiosity through the lens of biography?
Yeah, I guess I would want to do it to respond in terms of specifics. Um, when I'm dealing with biography, obviously I'm dealing with a specific individual. And there's usually something about that person that resonates in me, maybe a similar experience I've had, or something about that biographical subject that I feel others don't understand, that they haven't been sufficiently, shall we say, curious about. And it's a strange thing to say about certain biographers, but in a way, they can be very incurious.
When you write the biography of a specific individual, um, is your sense of your curiosity in the process of examining the life of that person, is your curiosity pretty much the same for each individual, or are you tailoring and calibrating your curiosity for that particular person?
I think it is a kind of calibration because I think the curious thing, no matter how many, even if you're a professional biographer and have done several biographies, it always feels, for me at least, like I'm starting from scratch in a way, from the beginning, because each subject is different.
Uh, my next question may be something you've already answered, or
Hmm.
it might be a different perspective, but I'll ask it anyway. Curiosity is an orientation towards the world, towards others, towards oneself. It is a mode of consciousness, a lens on life, and like a lens, it can refract consciousness like a prism in different ways, depending on the individual. In mythologies, there are figures who embody curiosity in different ways. There is Prometheus, Orpheus, Orpheus, Hermes, Odysseus, Loki, Faust, and in native mythology, the figures of coyote, raven, and fox. These figures can be visionary, harmonizing, rebellious, disruptive, tragic, comic, or therapeutic. And this is just a short hypothetical list to indicate possibilities, not to be definitive. So, of the many iconic figures you've written biographies about, do you see different types of curiosity in them? How would you explain the differences in their curiosity? What is mythic or iconic about their curiosity?
That's a really interesting question. Um, on the one hand, there's Martha Gellhorn, who is intensely curious. Obviously, obvious she her career as war correspondent, but also her novels as well and short stories. It's her life is so externalized. In fact, it's so externalized. She sees herself as giving herself over to events, which is what makes her reporting during the Spanish Civil War so much superior to Hemingway's. And in many ways, Hemingway was a superior writer to her, of course. But in this way of her giving herself over to events, of being kind of a vehicle for listening to people. It gets back a little bit to what Mailer was doing in The Executioner's Song. Her reports on the Spanish Civil War are so crystal clear, and she does not bring herself into it at all. When you look at Mailer's report, not Mailer, Hemingway's reports on the Spanish Civil War, he's always there. In part, it's he got trapped by his own persona, which is what Mailer was trying to get out of in The Executioner's Song. So that it's not that the reports on Spain are bad. They're not. They're very interesting and fascinating. But Gellhorn is superior in that respect, which I think is why, in her desire to report the world, so to speak, to go to Vietnam, she reported on the war in Vietnam. To go to Central America to report on the wars there. She was very hostile to biography. She felt that biography was demeaning, and that by my writing her biography, I was demeaning her. And she never got over that. Didn't matter what I might say. It isn't that she wouldn't cooperate. She was hostile. She was opposed. And I wrote two books, one while she was alive and one after she died, because there was new material and I wanted to come to some closure on Martha Gellhorn. She really saw curiosity as other directed. Um, it was her confrontation with the world. She was a great letter writer, but she's not very introspective about herself. She adopted a child, an Italian child. Um, that's a very fraught relationship between her and that adopted Italian child. And for many reasons, it's because she couldn't come to grips with her role as a mother, which Eve Arden does actually, and that I'm writing about in my biography. Sylvia Plath, on the other hand, who did some journalism, especially as a college student, and was pretty good at journalism and could have had a career as a journalism. When you look at her journals and many of her letters, and she started keeping diaries when she was 11 years old, they're very introspective. She's interested in her own psychology and why it is that she feels a certain way about certain things. And she's reading books on abnormal psychology. And this is getting back to Ruth Boischer again, her therapist. You're going to be in some ways tortured by this knowledge. And you're going to come across people who are going to, in a sense, isolate you or criticize you or look upon you as strange for the kind of knowledge that you're going to try to bring to the world. And as you're bringing this knowledge to the world, and this is very romantic, I think, that is, as comparing it to romantic poets, Plath is trying to do both. And that's what makes her a great artist, I think, is she's intensely interested in herself. Some people might even call her egomaniac or self-absorbed. I wouldn't deny that. But what people don't see is just how connected she was to the world. Her interest in politics, in international relations. You read a poem like Cut, she's in the kitchen. The speaker is in the kitchen, but this actually did happen to Plath. She practically cuts off the top of her finger. And she's looking at this and she's trying to bandage this finger. And she sees this blood flowing. I've been reading her childhood diaries. She's reading about the history of the Revolution, American Revolution, about the Redcoats. Suddenly, the Redcoats appear in this poem. Suddenly, she looks at this gauzy bandage, and the Ku Klux Klan get into this poem. I write about this in a couple of my Plath books, which gets at the kind of historical consciousness she had. All of them situate individuals in the world, and they're trying to understand themselves by understanding the world. And as a result, the world becomes, in a sense, interested in them. And that becomes, in a way, if Plath had lived longer, I think she would have written more novels about that theme of that intense curiosity. She could see, she was beginning to see certainly more than herself. If you compare her letters with the letters of her husband, Ted Hughes, his are all about poetry, and certainly she writes a lot about poetry in her letters and journals. But he doesn't have that political sensibility. He doesn't have that understanding of the world that she does. And that I think we're still, it's why I've written so many books on Plath. It's why we're still coming to a reckoning with that. With Michael Foot, who was a very prominent British politician, I had done a biography of his wife, Jo Craigie, who was a documentary filmmaker. With Michael Foot, his stepdaughter, it was Jo Craigie's daughter by a previous marriage before she married Michael Foot. but she was still quite young when her mother married Michael Foote. One of the first things she told me, the first time I interviewed the stepdaughter of Michael Foote, is, well, you'll never get him to talk about his affairs. Well, that was the first I knew that he had affairs. It didn't shock me, it didn't surprise me, but nobody else close to him had said a word about it. And she said, if you ask him about it, he won't he probably won't be responsive. He won't talk about it. I said, if he doesn't talk about it, we can't do the book. Because this is not an authorized, I don't do authorized biographies. It has to be my book. And when I first met him, because he knew Rebecca West, I had interviewed him then. And he was thrilled that I was going to do a biography of his wife. At that point, I didn't realize I was going to do a biography of him too. But obviously, if he had had these affairs and his wife did get to know about them, I was going to have to write about them in the book. Now, there had been a biography of Michael Foote, which had not mentioned these affairs. And a lot of biographers I know would not have talked about the affairs because they would have thought, well, it's not essential to what we know about him as a politician, as a public figure. But that's where I break the boundary, or I cross the road, so to speak, the boundary, in that I'm not just interested in the public figure. He's a public figure that people want to know about, and they want to know about more than, his head was full of ideas. He was, a full person, a whole person, a sexual being as well. And actually, it does have an impact on his politics, which might be a story for another day. It's in my book, A Private Life of Michael Foote. But anyway, so his stepdaughter tells me, you can't do this. So I think it was the second or third time I had interviewed him. I would come and stay in the house. That's another thing. How can you stay in somebody's house and then ask them embarrassing questions? Talk about breaking a boundary. A lot of people thought when they saw me in that house, oh, he's the authorized biographer. There are certain things we can count on this guy not to talk about. And as I said to the stepdaughter, that's not me. You might think it's me because I'm in the house and I'm working in Joe Craigie's study, writing about her, and I'm sleeping in Michael Foote's study with all his books. And so you're going to think, I'm in a sense a lackey, part of the Michael Foote enterprise, so to speak. But I had talked with him right from the beginning. I said, Michael, it's got to be my book. He said, oh, yes, it's your book. So to make a long story short, we sit down one afternoon and I said, Michael, I've been reading Jill's diaries. And she says things like, you can't trust secretaries. And I said, I don't think she's saying that as a generalization. I think she has somebody specific in mind. I think she has one of your secretaries in mind. There was a huge pause. I don't think he spoke a word for about 3 minutes. And I should say a tape recorder was running through this whole thing. It was in the days of tape recorders, tape. It really was taped. And finally he said, Carl, I know I have to talk about this. And eventually I did get him to talk about it, to talk about the affair with the secretary, but with a couple other women as well. And I sent him a copy of the book before it was published, and he did not object to that. He objected to something else, which I hadn't been counting on, and that was my depiction of his marriage, which he saw very differently from the way his wife did. And he thought, as many people often do, well, the biographer's got it wrong. And I said, Michael, I've got Jill's letters to her daughter. I've got her letters which describe her point of view. I'm not making this up. I'm not even inferring it. I'm dealing directly with her letters. That's what made him angry. That's what broke the boundary for him. Even though it was supposed to be my book, it offended his amor propria for what he thought the marriage was. Very much like Jane Carlyle and Thomas Carlyle, although Carlyle came to realize what a bastard he had been during the marriage. But Michael Foote never could come to terms with it. And subsequently, I got letters from members of his family, particularly his nephew, who was also a writer, said, Carl, how could you abuse Michael's hospitality? That's who I am. That's what a biographer does, as far as I'm concerned.
Carl, when I listen to what you said, I'm thinking that your books are evidence of your curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
and they are evidence of what you said, which is, I take to be, if you want your curiosity to get to the essence, your curiosity has to break some boundaries and some restrictions. And the way anybody can test that is to go to the body of your work and and um, get a sense of how they think you've got to the essence through your curiosity.
Yes, yeah, yeah, very much so. I have a kind of motto, a kind of mantra that comes from Samuel Johnson, who was a great biographer himself and wrote great things about biography, in which he said the biographer's first obligation is to the truth, not to your subject's friends, not to concerns about how they will react to it, but to truthfully seeing the subject, and that's certainly what I try to do. And you can't do that without really intense curiosity and leaving no stone unturned, as Robert Caro would say, or no page unturned.
But there are consequences
Oh yeah,
to that ethos, as you know. There are consequences to being relentless in digging up the truth, being relentless in your curiosity. There are consequences, and there's consequences for you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think so. I think my career would have looked differently. I think one biographer once gave me the advice of, after I'd done Rebecca West, she said you should stay in that realm. Do other English writers, cultivate an audience, make sure that you've got this sort of accumulation. I said that sounds good, but it's not me. I people don't understand. They say, well, what could possibly tie together, say, Marilyn Monroe and Michael Foote and Martha Gellhorn and Norman Mailer and Rebecca West and Amy Lowell and all the subjects I've done? And I said, well, the answer is simple. What ties them together is me. It's organic. It's Paul Murray Kendall said every biography is an autobiography. I think that's truer for some biographers than others. It's certainly true of me.
If somebody could ever understand the totality of what you just said, the totality and the interconnections um, of your biographies, they'd understand you. I'm not sure if that's even possible though.
It's difficult, especially, the world we live in, but they don't seem to understand that it's part of a lifetime project. Uh, it would be very curious for someone to read all of my work, and I think they could. I think you're right. They would have me, or certainly an essential part of me. I tried to do this a bit in a book called Confessions of a Serial Biographer. It's not really an autobiography, but it is about the way I work.
You've been so prolific. Um, it feels to me like it's almost impossible to encompass you, to read everything you've written, um, and the podcasts you've done, and the all the other writings, the reviews, and everything you've done. To me, it's mind-boggling to think of a person trying to encompass your whole work. That just you're so prolific, and then how can one understand your personality, your character, your thinking, it being so prolific.
Yeah, yeah. There it is. It's a mystery.
Speaking of mystery, what type of curiosity did you have when you were younger and not guided so much by a consciousness what you wanted to know and a career as a biographer later?
I think it goes back to Mailer's biography of Marilyn Monroe. In 1978, I published an article about Norman Mailer's biography of Marilyn Monroe for a journal called Biography. And I said one of the attractive things about Mailer's book is his discussion of the things that he didn't know or couldn't know. Uh, and he says toward the end of Marilyn Monroe's life, so she leaves us in doubt. Could be this, it could be that, in what is going through her mind at the last moments of her life. You can't know. As a novelist, he sort of speculates in a way, but so do biographers as well. But I mean, he really motivated me to think about biography. It's a biography of Marilyn Monroe, but it's a biography about biography. It had this extra dimension to it, which I found absolutely fascinating. And I've said this to Mailer's children. He's the one that sort of opened up this whole field. I could see that my interest in acting, in impersonating a role, was directly connected to the idea of biography. And in that sense, Norman Mailer set me free.